The black stallion bucked like thunder incarnate, its hooves striking sparks against the rocky canyon floor as Celestin gripped the reins with supernatural grace. Baron Marcellus Ravencrest watched from his mount, jaw slack, as the girl he'd hired 3 days ago to tend his cattle performed what could only be described as equestrian sorcery. Impossible, he breathed, watching her lean into the stallion's fury, becoming one with the beast's wild energy rather than fighting it. The horse that had thrown 7 of his best ranch hands now responded to her touch like a lover's whisper. Celestin's raven hair whipped behind her as she guided the massive animal through a series of impossibly tight turns, chasing down a bull that had broken from the herd and threatened to plunge over the canyon's edge. Marcellus had inherited this vast Thornwick ranch along with a crushing loneliness that echoed through its empty halls. At 32, the Baron had given up on finding anyone who could match his passion for the untamed wilderness of his lands. Women of his social circle found his ranch rustic and uncivilized. Men respected his wealth but feared his intensity. Then, 3 days ago, a slip of a girl had appeared at his door, weather-beaten hat in hand, asking for work. Her clothes were dust-covered, her boots worn thin, but her emerald eyes held a fire that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Against his foreman's advice, he'd hired her on the spot. Now, watching her rope the wayward bull with a precision that defied physics, Marcellus felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with admiration for her skills, and everything to do with the way she moved like liquid poetry in the saddle. Celestin brought the bull back to the herd with a triumphant whoop that echoed off the canyon walls. When she rode up to where Marcellus waited, her cheeks flushed with exertion and her eyes sparkling with wild joy, he forgot how to breathe. "Your bull's got spirit," she said, patting her stallion's neck. "But he's got nothing on Midnight here." "Midnight?" Marcellus managed, his usual commanding presence reduced to stammering confusion. "That horse's name was Demon's Breath, according to your men." Celestin's smile was pure mischief. "But he told me he prefers Midnight. Horses always know their true names." The Baron stared at her, this impossible creature who spoke to animals and rode like she'd been born in the saddle. "Who are you really?" Her smile faltered for just a moment, and Marcellus caught a glimpse of something deeper in her eyes, a pain that mirrored his own isolation, a wildness that couldn't be tamed by convention or expectation. "Just a girl who understands horses better than people," she said softly, then kicked Midnight into a gallop toward the distant ranch house. Marcellus followed, his heart pounding with a rhythm that had nothing to do with the ride and everything to do with the realization that his carefully ordered world had just been turned upside down by a woman who could make wild stallions dance. That night, as he watched her from his study window, grooming Midnight under the stars and singing what sounded like ancient lullabies, Baron Marcellus Ravencrest knew his lonely days were numbered. Celestin's voice drifted through the barn like honey and smoke, the melody foreign yet hauntingly familiar. Marcellus pressed himself against the doorframe, afraid that stepping into the light would shatter whatever spell she wove around the horses. Every animal in the stable stood perfectly still, ears pricked forward as if they too were enchanted by her song. "Didn't take you for an eavesdropper, Baron." He jumped, heat flooding his face as Celestin turned from Midnight's stall, brush still in hand. Even in the dim lantern light, her knowing smile made his pulse quicken. "I was checking on the horses." He lied, stepping into the barn with what he hoped looked like casual authority. "At midnight?" She arched an eyebrow that somehow managed to be both skeptical and amused. "Most owners trust their hired help to handle the animals. Most owners don't have hired help who can tame demons." The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Celestin resumed brushing Midnight's coat, but Marcellus noticed the slight tremor in her hands. Where did you learn to ride like that?" he asked, moving closer despite every rational thought screaming warnings. "My father," the brush stilled. "Before he died. I'm sorry." She shrugged, but he caught the way her jaw tightened. "He taught me everything: how to read horses, how to become part of their movement, how to speak their language." She paused, then added quietly, "He also taught me that some secrets are worth keeping, even when they hurt." Marcellus felt the weight of her words, the suggestion of mysteries that ran deeper than exceptional horsemanship. "What kind of secrets?" Celestin set down the brush and turned to face him fully. In the flickering lantern light, her features seemed almost ethereal, as if she might vanish like morning mist if he blinked too hard. The kind that keep you moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The kind that make you good at leaving before anyone can ask too many questions. "Are you planning to leave?" The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and vulnerable in a way that made him want to retreat to the safety of his study and his whiskey. She studied his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see straight through his carefully constructed walls to the loneliness he kept hidden beneath layers of wealth and authority. "That depends," she said finally. "On what?" "On whether you're the kind of man who can accept that some horses need to run free, even when you want to keep them close." The metaphor wasn't lost on him. Marcellus stepped closer, close enough to smell the leather and wildflowers that seemed to cling to her skin, close enough to see the vulnerability she tried to hide behind her bold words. "What if I told you I've never met anyone who could make my horses sing?" he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "What if I said I've been waiting my whole life for someone who understands that the wildest things are often the most beautiful?" Celestin's breath caught, and for a moment the space between them hummed with possibility. Then midnight snorted, breaking the spell, and she stepped back with a shaky laugh. "Your Baron's charm won't work on me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This isn't charm." He reached out, almost touching her face before letting his hand fall. "This is me being honest for the first time in years." She stared at him for a long moment, something fierce and frightened warring in her eyes. Then she grabbed her jacket from a nearby post and headed for the barn door. "Good night, Baron," she called over her shoulder. "Try not to dream of wild horses." But as Marcellus stood alone in the barn, surrounded by the contented murmurs of his horses and the lingering scent of wildflowers, he knew he'd dream of nothing else. The morning brought news that made Marcellus's blood run cold. His foreman, old Jasper, stood hat in hand in the ranch house kitchen, his weathered face grim. "Raiders hit the Henderson spread last night," Jasper reported. "Made off with near 50 head of prime cattle. Word is they're headed this way." Marcellus's jaw tightened. The Crimson Hawks, a notorious gang of cattle thieves who'd been terrorizing ranches throughout the territory for months. "How many men can we spare for guard duty?" "Most of the hands are still out on the far range. Won't be back for 3 days. Jasper's expression darkened. "We got maybe 6 men who can handle a rifle proper." Through the window, Marcellus spotted Celestin leading Midnight toward the training corral, her movements fluid and purposeful despite the early hour. An idea formed dangerous, potentially foolish, but the only plan that made sense given their circumstances. "What about the girl?" he asked. Jasper followed his gaze and snorted. "She's handy with horses, I'll grant you, but this ain't woman's work, Baron. Show me a woman, Jasper, and I'll agree with you." By the time Marcellus reached the corral, Celestin had Midnight performing intricate maneuvers that would have impressed the finest cavalry officers. She pulled up as he approached, and he noticed something different in her posture: alert, almost predatory. "Trouble coming?" she asked without preamble. He studied her face, surprised by her directness. "What makes you say that?" "Your foreman Looks like he swallowed something sour, and you're walking like a man preparing for a fight." She dismounted with fluid grace. "Plus, the horses have been restless all morning. They can sense when danger's in the wind." Marcellus made a decision that would have shocked his late father and probably should have shocked him. "Can you handle a rifle as well as you handle a horse?" Celestin's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Better. The Crimson Hawks are headed this way. I'm short on men and long on cattle they'd love to steal." "How many?" "Reports vary. Maybe a dozen." She nodded thoughtfully, then moved to midnight saddlebags and withdrew something that made Marcellus's eyes widen. The rifle was sleek, expensive, and bore intricate engravings along its barrel, not the weapon of a simple ranch hand. "Custom." "Sharps," she said, noticing his stare. "Shoots true at 800 yards. She checked the mechanism with practiced efficiency. "My father's gift for my 16th birthday." "Just how wealthy was your father?" Marcellus asked, pieces of her mysterious past clicking together. Celestin's expression shuddered. "Wealthy enough to make enemies. Powerful enough to make the kind of mistakes that get your family killed." She slung the rifle across her shoulder. "Rich enough to leave his daughter with skills most ladies never need and secrets that could get her hanged." Before Marcellus could process the implications of her words, the thunder of approaching hooves echoed across the valley. A cloud of dust rose from the main trail. Too many horses, moving too fast to be friendly visitors. "Looks like we're out of time for questions," Celestin said, swinging back into Midnight's saddle. "How do you want to play this?" Marcellus felt a surge of something he'd almost forgotten. The thrill of facing danger alongside someone he trusted completely, despite knowing almost nothing about her. "Can you get to the ridge overlooking the main approach?" he asked. "Give me 5 minutes." She gathered the reins. "And Baron? When this is over, I'll tell you why the Crimson Hawks might be here for more than just your cattle." She wheeled Midnight around and galloped toward the high ground, leaving Marcellus staring after her with the growing certainty that Celestin's secrets ran deeper and darker than he'd ever imagined. The sound of approaching riders grew closer, and he ran for the ranch house to gather his men, his mind reeling with questions he might not live to ask. The first shot rang out just as the sun reached its zenith, Celestin's rifle singing from the ridge like an angel of death. One of the lead riders tumbled from his saddle, and the rest of the Crimson Hawks scattered for cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Marcellus crouched behind the water trough, Winchester ready, watching his mysterious employee work miracles with that custom sharps. Every shot found its mark, not to kill, but to wound and scatter, driving the raiders back with surgical precision that spoke of military training far beyond anything a ranch hand should possess. "She's buying us time," Jasper muttered from behind the barn door. "But they'll figure out it's mostly one shooter soon enough." As if summoned by his words, 3 riders broke from cover and charged toward the ridge where Celestin had positioned herself. Marcellus's heart stopped as he watched her coolly reload, but the angle was wrong. She couldn't hit all 3 before they reached her position. He was already running, spurring his horse across the open ground despite the bullets whining past his ears. The Baron of Thornwick Ranch had never backed down from a fight, and he wasn't about to start now. The first rider reached the ridge as Celestin put a bullet through his shoulder. The second made it halfway up the slope before Marcellus's Winchester spoke, sending him sprawling. But the third ... Marcellus single quotes S blood turned to ice as he recognized the man climbing toward Celestin's nest. Vex Morgan, the Crimson Hawks leader. A killer with a price on his head in 3 territories and a face that belonged on wanted posters from here to California. "Well, well," Morgan called out as he reached Celestin's position, his colt trained on her back. "If it ain't the lovely Celestin Blackheart, daughter of the infamous Colonel Blackheart." Marcellus's world tilted. Colonel Blackheart, the name every man west of the Mississippi knew and feared. the Confederate officer who disappeared at war's end with a fortune in stolen gold, only to surface as the most successful outlaw the territories had ever seen before his mysterious death. 2 years ago, Celestin turned slowly, her rifle still in hand but pointed at the ground. Even at this distance, Marcellus could see the pain in her posture, the weight of a past that had finally caught up with her. "Hello, Vex," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "I wondered when you'd track me down." 3 years. I've been hunting you, girl. 3 years since you vanished with the location of your daddy's treasure. Morrigan's voice was silk over steel. Time to come home and fulfill your obligations. My obligations died with him. Your daddy owed us, and now you do. The Crimson Hawks don't forget debts. Marcellus had heard enough. He spurred his horse up the ridge, trusting speed and surprise over stealth. His shot took Morrigan in the gun, arm spinning the outlaw around and sending his Colt flying. But Morrigan was faster than a man had any right to be. His left hand found the knife at his belt and sent it spinning through the air toward Celestin with deadly accuracy. Time slowed. Marcellus watched the blade tumble end over end, knowing he was too far away, too late to stop what was about to happen. Then Celestin moved, a liquid twist that spoke of training no rancher's daughter should possess. And the knife buried itself harmlessly in a dead tree. Her rifle came up in the same motion, the barrel kissing the center of Morrigan's forehead. "The Crimson Hawk's business with the Blackheart family ends today," she said, her voice steady as granite. "Right away, Vex. Don't make me finish what my father started." For a long moment, the only sound was wind through the sagebrush. Then Morrigan smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made Marcellus's skin crawl. "This ain't over, girl. The treasure's too big a prize, and there's others who remember your face." He backed away slowly, then turned and ran for his horse. Within minutes, the remaining Hawks were retreating toward the horizon, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Celestin lowered her rifle and turned to face Marcellus, and he saw in her eyes the truth he'd been too blind to recognize. She was as dangerous as she was beautiful, as hunted as she was haunted. "Now you know," she said simply. "Now I know," he agreed, and started up the ridge toward the woman who just turned his world upside down in ways he was only beginning to understand. The ranch house felt too small for the weight of secrets between them. They sat on the porch. As twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, neither speaking, both knowing that everything had changed in the space of a single violent afternoon. Celestin had cleaned her rifle with methodical precision, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what had been revealed. Marcellus watched her work, marveling at how someone who moved with such deadly efficiency could also gentle wild horses with a touch. "My real name is Celestin Blackheart," she said finally, not looking up from the weapon. "My father was Colonel Josiah Blackheart, war hero turned outlaw king. My mother died when I was 12, and after that, it was just him and me in whatever military camp or outlaw hideout he called home that month. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her green eyes met his, fierce with determination. "You nearly died today because of who I am. You deserve the truth." Marcellus leaned back in his chair, processing the enormity of what she was telling him. The most wanted man in 3 territories had been her father. The treasure every bounty hunter and outlaw gang dreamed of finding was connected to the woman. Sitting on his porch, cleaning her rifle like it was the most natural thing in the world. When the war ended, my father couldn't stop fighting. He gathered men who felt the same lost souls who didn't know how to live without the conflict that defined them. She set down the cleaning rod, her voice growing distant. At first, they justified it as survival, taking from carpetbaggers and corrupt officials. But power corrupts, and eventually they were just thieves with pretty speeches. And you were with them? Until I turned 18. That's when I realized I had a choice, become like them or run as far and fast as I could. Her laugh was bitter. Turns out you can't outrun your bloodline forever. Marcellus stood and moved to the porch rail, looking out over the land he'd inherited, the peaceful valley that had become a battleground because of the woman behind him. He should have been angry, should have demanded she leave before more trouble found his doorstep. Instead, he found himself asking, "Do you know where it is? Your father's treasure?" Silence stretched between them. When he turned back, Celestine was staring at her hands, and he saw something that surprised him. Shame. "Yes," she whispered, "I know exactly where it is." "How much?" "Enough to buy 3 ranches this size. Enough to set a person up for life or fund an army." She looked up at him, and her eyes held a vulnerability that made his chest ache. "Enough to make me worth hunting until the day I die." Marcellus returned to his chair, leaning forward so their knees almost touched. "Then why haven't you claimed it?" "Because it's blood money." The words came out harsh, raw with old pain. "Every coin my father stole came from someone suffering. Widows' savings, town's emergency funds, money meant for schools and hospitals." She shook her head. "I've spent 3 years trying to forget where it's hidden and 3 years failing." "So you run from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments." "Never staying long enough to get people killed because of who I am," she corrected. "Like I almost got you killed today." Marcellus reached out and took her hand, surprised by its warmth, by the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder choices. "I'm a grown man, Celestine. I make my own decisions about what risks are worth taking." "And what decision have you made about me?" The question hung between them, loaded with hope and fear in equal measure. Marcellus looked at this woman who could tame wild horses and face down killers with equal skill, who carried her father's sins like chains while fighting to forge her own path. "I've decided," he said carefully, "that the loneliest place in the world is a heart that's afraid to trust." Celestine's breath caught. Marcellus ... "I've decided that I'd rather die defending something beautiful than live safely with nothing worth protecting." She was quiet for so long he thought he'd gone too far, revealed too much. Then she squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "You don't know what you're saying. The danger, the constant running, the enemies who'll never stop hunting." "I know," he said simply, "and I'm still here." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and Marcellus thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful than the hope dawning in Celestine Blackheart's eyes. 3 weeks passed in deceptive peace. Celestine threw herself into ranch work with newfound intensity, as if she could outrun her past through sheer physical effort. Marcellus found excuses to work alongside her, their conversations ranging from cattle breeding to books they'd read, from childhood memories to dreams they'd harbored in secret. Neither spoke of the moment on the porch when everything changed, but it hung between them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Then the letter arrived. Marcellus found Celestine in the far pasture, teaching a young colt to respond to voice commands. The animal followed her movements with the devoted attention he was beginning to recognize in all creatures that fell under her influence: horses, cattle, and he was forced to admit, lonely barrens. "This came for you," he said, holding out the envelope that bore no return address but somehow radiated menace. Celestine's face went pale as she recognized the handwriting. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper within. "What does it say?" Marcellus asked when the silence stretched too long. "They have my cousin Isadora." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The only family I have left. Morrigan's holding her in Deadwood Gulch." "What does he want?" She crumpled the letter in her fist. "A trade. Isadora's life for the location of my father's treasure." I have 3 days to decide. Marcellus felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're not seriously considering? She's innocent. Celestine's eyes blazed with fury and pain. Isadora never chose this life. She was raised by our aunt in Boston, away from all of it. The only reason they found her is because of me. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But it's also the only family I have left in the world. She turned away from him, her shoulders rigid with contained emotion. I won't let her die for my father's sins. That night, Marcellus found her in the barn, packing supplies into midnight saddlebags. Her movements were efficient, methodical, those of someone preparing for a journey she might not survive. You're leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. At first light, she didn't look at him. I've written down everything you need to know about managing the horses. Midnight should stay with you. He's too recognizable. And where I'm going, I need to be invisible. Take me with you. Now she did turn, her expression fierce with protective instinct. Absolutely not. Celestine. No. She stepped closer, her hands coming up to frame his face with desperate tenderness. You've given me something I never thought I'd have a glimpse of what normal life could feel like. I won't destroy that by dragging you into this nightmare. What if I choose to be dragged? Then I choose not to let you. Her voice broke on the words. Please, Marcellus, let me do this one thing right. Let me save her without destroying you. He caught her hands, holding them against his face, memorizing the feel of her touch. What if you don't come back? Then remember that these past weeks were the happiest of my life. Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and kissed him soft and desperate and tasting of tears he didn't realize she was crying. When she pulled away, her eyes held all the words they'd never had time to say. Goodbye, Baron, she whispered by morning. She was gone. Marcellus stood in the empty barn, staring at midnight's vacant stall, and felt his heart break for the second time in his life. The first had been when his parents died, leaving him alone. With wealth and responsibility and no one to share either burden with, this was worse. This was watching love walk away because it cared too much to stay. But as he saddled his fastest horse and checked his rifle, Baron Marcellus Ravencrest realized something. Celestine had forgotten in her desperate need to protect him. He'd spent his entire adult life being responsible, being safe, being careful. It was time to be reckless. It was time to fight for something that mattered more than his own life. Deadwood Gulch was a 3-day ride, and he intended to arrive just in time to prove that sometimes the greatest risk was not taking one at all. Deadwood Gulch squatted in the Badlands like a festering wound, its ramshackle buildings crowding around a muddy main street that had seen more blood than rain. Marcellus arrived at sunset, his horse lathered and trembling, his own body pushed to its limits by 3 days of punishing travel. He'd expected to find Celestine already captured, already forced into whatever trap Morrigan had set. Instead, he found chaos. The abandoned silver mine at the gulch's heart blazed with lantern light, and the crack of rifle fire echoed off the surrounding cliffs. Marcellus dismounted and crept closer, using boulders and abandoned mining equipment for cover. What he saw made his blood sing with pride and terror in equal measure. Celestine had turned Morrigan's trap inside out. Instead of surrendering herself for her cousin's freedom, she'd somehow infiltrated the mine complex and was systematically dismantling the Crimson Hawks from within. Bodies of outlaws lay scattered around defensive positions that had become death traps, and the remaining Hawks were pinned down in the main shaft, afraid to advance or retreat. Through his spyglass, Marcellus spotted a young woman with hair the color of autumn leaves crouched behind an ore cart near the mine entrance. Isadora, he presumed, clutching what looked like Celestine's spare pistol with grim determination. Then he saw her. Celestine moved through the maze of mining tunnels like a phantom, appearing just long enough to deliver devastating shots before melting back into the shadows. She'd found high ground in the wooden framework that supported the mine's upper levels, turning the entire complex into her personal hunting ground. But even as Marcellus watched with growing admiration, he could see the fatal flaw in her plan. She was magnificent, deadly, unstoppable, and completely outnumbered. Morrigan had brought more men than expected, and they were beginning to coordinate their response. Eventually, they'd corner her in those tunnels, and all her skill wouldn't save her from crossfire in a confined space, unless someone created a different kind of chaos entirely. Marcellus smiled grimly and began preparing charges with the mining dynamite he'd liberated from an abandoned supply shed. If Celestin wanted to play this dangerous game, she wouldn't play it alone. The first explosion brought down half the mine's support structure and sent Hawks scrambling for new cover. The second sealed the main tunnel entrance, trapping Morrigan's remaining men in the complex with their prey. But the third was Marcellus's masterstroke. Instead of bringing down more tunnels, it collapsed the hillside above the mine, creating a landslide that blocked every escape route except one, the narrow ledge that led to the old processing plant, where Marcellus waited with his Winchester and a view of everything below. "Celestin," he called out, his voice echoing through the complex. "Time to end this." She appeared on the ledge moments later, Isadora close behind her, both women moving with the desperate speed of those who understand that survival depends on perfect execution. "You magnificent fool," Celestin gasped as they reached his position. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are," he replied, reloading his rifle as shouts echoed from below. "Refusing to lose the most important thing in my life." Morrigan's voice cut through the dust and confusion. "Enough games, Blackheart. You want the girl to live, you'll tell me where that treasure's hidden." Celestin's expression went cold as winter stone. She stepped to the edge of the ledge, her rifle trained on the shadows below. "I'll make you a counteroffer, Vex," she called back. "Walk away now and I won't put a bullet between your eyes. You're in no position to make demands, am I not?" The shot that followed was impossible, a ricochet that struck 3 different metal surfaces before finding its target, sending Morrigan's hat flying and proving beyond doubt that in these tunnels, at this range, Celestin Blackheart was death incarnate. "Next shot goes lower," she announced. "Your choice." The silence stretched for heartbeats. Then came the sound of boots on stone, moving away from the mine entrance. "This ain't over." Morrigan's voice was fading, defeated but not destroyed. "The Hawks have long memories." "So do Blackhearts," Celestin replied softly. They waited until the sounds of retreat faded completely before beginning their own careful descent from the ledge. As they reached the bottom of the gulch, Isadora threw herself into Celestin's arms with a sob of relief. "I thought I'd never see you again," the younger woman whispered. "Same here." Celestin's voice was thick with emotion as she held her cousin close. "I'm so sorry you got pulled into this." "Are you kidding?" Isadora pulled back with a grin that bore a distinct family resemblance to Celestin's own wild smile. "That was the most excitement I've had since leaving Boston. Though next time, maybe warn me before you decide to single-handedly assault a gang of outlaws." Marcellus watched the reunion with warmth spreading through his chest, but it was Celestin's expression when she turned to him that stopped his breath entirely. In her eyes he saw not just gratitude but something deeper wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. "You came after me," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She stepped closer, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "Never," he said fiercely, covering her hands with his own. "I told you once that the loneliest place in the world is a heart afraid to trust. I'm done being afraid, Celestin. Are you?" Her answer was a kiss that tasted like gunpowder and tears and the promise of tomorrow. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "The treasure," she whispered. "My father's blood money." "I know you're going to ask." "No," he said gently, "I'm not." She blinked in surprise. "But what you do with your father's legacy is your choice. Not mine, not Morgan's, not anyone else's. Your choice." The smile that spread across her face was radiant as sunrise. "In that case, I know exactly what to do with it." 6 months later, the Thornwick Foundation distributed its first grants to schools and hospitals throughout the territory, funded by an anonymous donation that historians would spend decades trying to trace. Baron Marcellus Ravencrest married Celestin Blackheart in a ceremony attended by half the territory's ranchers and a surprising number of reformed outlaws who'd heard that the colonel's daughter had found her way home at last. As for the Crimson Hawks, they discovered that some women are too dangerous to hunt, especially when they're protected by a baron who'd learned that the wildest things in life are indeed the most beautiful and worth any risk to keep. Celestin never did get around to watching his cattle. She was too busy teaching their children to ride, training horses that danced to her voice, and proving every day that sometimes the best treasures are the ones you choose to build rather than inherit. In the evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, she and Marcellus would sit on their porch and watch the stars appear over their valley, their land, their legacy, their love that had survived blood feuds and outlaw gangs and the terrible weight of the past. "Any regrets?" he would ask, as he did every night. "Only one," she would reply, settling into his arms. "That it took me so long to realize that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you choose to build." And in the barn, midnight would whinny. Soft agreement, content at last to be exactly where he belonged.